Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to Outrider 50. E.P. Thompson, Dissent and Defiance. And this Outrider is dedicated to Piper and to Aidan. We've come into this sort of habit of every Outrider that finishes with a 0, we return back to the original project of this series, and that is we investigate a startling, original, complicated human that has walked ahead of us, that has challenged us, and challenged us to get outside of our banality and our mediocrity. And needless to say, when we reach Outrider 50, the archetype of the Outrider project is our focus, E.P. Thompson. E.P. Thompson is the type of academic that our universities simply do not support anymore. Too radical, too outspoken, too critical. But what's significant is that even in his own time, the university system could not support him. He kicked at the powerful, and he called out every time the hypocrisy that he saw. Now, he was wrong a lot, and like many of the Outriders that we investigate, there is something also very productive in that wrongness. E.P. Thompson changed my life. I wouldn't be who I am without him. Now, I first heard his name and heard about him when I just turned 18 years of age. In fact, I was 18 years, 2 weeks when I heard about E.P. Thompson and I read his work. And this all happened in a first-year university history course, late modern European history. And week 1 of the course was on E.H. Carr, quote, study the historian before you study the facts, end of quote. And week 2 of that course was on E.P. Thompson. This was a radical course in a very conservative university, in a very conservative discipline. History at that time was about public white blokes and what they did. But this course was different. And week 2 focused on E.P. Thompson and his landmark book, The Making of the English Working Class. We wouldn't be allowed to construct a curriculum today like this curriculum existed, because every single week we had to read a very, very large and very dense history book and 10 refereed articles about the historiography on the historian. So we would read the historian and 10 articles about historiography. And this was one course of 4 that I did in first year. So needless to say, I read a lot, I worked very hard, but my goodness me, I learnt a lot as well, and I carry those lessons with me every single day. But this book was a life pivot for me as an impossibly young human. And again, it emerged in the second week of a course. I would not be where I am today, I would not be who I am today without the second week in that history course. This was a life, and this was a book that matters. So let's talk today about this life and this book. There are lessons that we can learn from this man and this book, and that's why we're focusing the Outrider on him today. Edward Palmer Thompson was born in 1924 and died in 1993 at 69 years of age. He also had a very famous marriage to Dorothy Thompson, an outstanding historian in her own right of the Chartist movement. Now, her role in allowing EPT to be the Outrider that we're discussing today will return to. So remember, Dorothy's important to this story as well. But he was educated at Corpus Christi College in Cambridge, where he graduated from first class honours in history. And we'll talk about his university career, the volatility of that university career at the University of Warwick, and also his odd relationship with the University of Leeds. Thompson has many claims to fame. Perhaps the most important emerged in 1966 where he created a phrase, quote, history from below, end of quote. Changed history, certainly transformed social history. Those of you that have ever heard of history from below, that comes from Edward Palmer Thompson. The phrase captured the work from the Communist Party's history group and their activities to disseminate historical materialism. E.P. Thompson was famous, and he was famous in his own lifetime in a way that academics are very rarely famous. And in a History Today poll in 2011, he was the second most important historian that they logged, the first being, of course, Ferdinand Braudel. He had an unusual life and had many of the characteristics of his generation, which I can say is also my parents' generation. His parents were Methodists, or as my 94-year-old mother would describe them, methos. So his parents were Methodists, that's important. But he also served in the Second World War, as did his elder brother, William. And William Thompson was captured and he was shot assisting the Bulgarian anti-fascist partisans. So this is a political family. E.P. Thompson would write 2 books about his brother, the first with his mother in 1947 and one posthumous book after his death. So after the war, he went to Cambridge and he joined the Communist Party of Great Britain. And that is not as unusual a combination as it seems. And he formed in 1946 the Communist Party Historians Group. And in this group included, hang on to yourself, Christopher Hill, Eric Hobsbawm, Rodney Hilton. Unbelievable. And from this group, they formed a journal, Past and Present. Still exists, wonderful journal. And much to my amusement, it's codified as a Tier 1 journal in history. So a Tier 1 journal in history came from the Communist Party of Great Britain. How's that working for you, Elsevier and Scopus? So Thompson's early career was influenced by, and that word isn't even strong enough, influenced by William Morris. His first big book as an academic was a biography of William Morris, and the subtitles, incredibly important, From Romantic to Revolutionary. This book was an intervention, particularly important at the time, but an intervention in understanding the roots of Marxism. And EPT was arguing, particularly at a time of the Soviet Union, that there were English roots to Marxism. Powerfully, he also valued the art of Morris and argued that the art was part of the politics. Very powerful. He also founded a journal, The New Reasoner, in 1957, and that became one of the scaffolding publications into the New Left Review, which still exists. But Thompson had to confront something incredibly difficult when he was a young scholar. Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech that was not a secret speech at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1956 logged Stalin's crimes against humanity. But also in 1956, of course, the Soviets invaded Hungary. In response, E.P. Thompson resigned from the Communist Party. And remember, he joined that party as a teenager. So at this point, he started to describe himself as a socialist humanist. And he set up that journal, The New Reasoner, and it became the arm of the New Left, with or without the inverted commas. The New Left was formed in, New Left Review was founded in 1960, but important to the narrative we're constructing here, E.P. Thompson fell out with the editor of the New Left Review, the legendary Perry Anderson. So Thompson's seen as the leader of the first New Left, Anderson's the leader of the second New Left that was shaped by Tarkal Ali, and obviously a series of, how do we describe them, Trotskyite allegiances. Okay, so we're learning that Thompson was a man of commitment, a man of compassion, deep values formed in him when he was a very, very young man. And he also had deep disappointments in his life, particularly his political life. His gift to the world, and very few of us ever have an opportunity or the ability to make a gift to the world such as this, was his remarkable book, The Making of the English Working Class. For all of us who are doing academic life really tough at the moment, I see you, dear colleagues, I see you. For those of us that are doing higher education pretty tough, I think it's important to remember that E.P. Thompson wrote The Making of the English Working Class while teaching adult education classes as a tutor for the University of Leeds. He was not in a balanced role. He was not in a research-only role. He was in a teaching-only role and an intensive teaching role. And yet through this intense teaching role, he wrote a book that changed the world. He explored how ordinary people are pushed down, marginalised, ignored, but how from that position they resist. They resist. The entire discipline of history changed through this one book. And let me give you a couple of tastes of it. In many ways, the entirety of the discipline of history changed not only in relation to this one book, but in response to one sentence. And here it is, quote, "I am seeking to rescue the poor stockinger, the Luddite cropper, the obsolete handloom weaver, the utopian artisan, and even the deluded follower of Joanna Southcote from the enormous condescension of posterity." End of quote. There it is. The enormous condescension of posterity. And that amazing sentence was followed by one more. Quote, "Their aspirations were valid in terms of their own experience, and if they were casualties of history, they remain condemned in their own lives as casualties." End of quote. The world changed with those sentences. So whenever you ask yourself, does writing matter? Does research matter? Does scholarship matter? Remember those sentences. Although Thompson produced one unbelievable book in his career, his influence certainly did not stop there. He also transformed the disciplines of sociology and anthropology with his remarkable article Time, Work Discipline and Industrial Capitalism, published in 1967. I still use this article, and he showed how the industrial clock transformed the relationship of a human as a worker with their own body. Incredible article. The other crucial part of the E.P. Thompson story is that he simply could not stomach working in higher education. And in 1971, yes, 1971, he wrote the book, well, pamphlet really, Warwick University Limited, where he protested the commercialisation of the university sector. Now, he wrote this in 1971. Now, he resigned from Warwick, so he wrote this pamphlet and he resigned. He went, "This is rubbish, I'm out of here, and let me explain why." Now, through the rest of his career, he would occasionally do visiting professorial posts, but most of the time he was simply a citizen writing. And there is plenty of fight left in this supposedly post-academic period. In 1978, he published The Poverty of Theory, and he attacked overtly Althusserian Marxism and Louis Althusser. And of course, he was riffing off Karl Popper's 1936 book, The Poverty of Historicism. His work is so influential that when people had to take it on, when people had to critique it, it often took whole books to offer a response. And that, of course, became Perry Anderson's Arguments Within English Marxism. So it's very easy to forget so many years after A.P. Thompson's death that he was also a popular figure. He was part of popular culture. He was part of these daily discussions about citizenship in the media. His name was known, his writing was known, his voice was known, his face was known. And many of these essays engaging with public intellectual life were brought together in 1980 for the remarkable collection. I still love this book. I read it so frequently, Writing by Candlelight. An amazing book, and it shows the alignment between a dissenting, organic and public intellectual. And probably EPT was the last scholar who was able to balance that and create an identity. From the 1980s, all these roles combined to make him a leader for the campaign for nuclear disarmament. He became known throughout the world at this point for his courageous dissent. He wrote the pamphlet Protest and Survive as the intellectual justification of the movement. So whenever you hear protest and survive, that phrase comes from EPT. He was a member of END and CND through the 1980s. He was a riveting public speaker. He had the capacity to inflame and transform. He was also a riveting writer. He could be granular but poetic in his polemic. Can I say he also did something important? He did the hard yakka in these committees as well. He wasn't just the front face or the voice. He did the hard, invisible committee work. He was a man of essays at this point, a man of polemics, and these gathered in such books as the 1982 Zero Option and The Heavy Dancers, published in 1987. His last book, that was finished while he was alive, was again a return to William Blake, Witness Against the Beast. As you can see, he was working right until the end of his life. So what we learn from E.P. Thompson is that we all can produce extraordinary research from forgotten and marginalised places. He taught in an adult education program for the University of Leeds, and from here, this is where he created the book that changed the world. The Making of the English Working Class is still in print 70 years after it was published. How many of us will ever write a book that 70 years later is still cited and talked about? He didn't work in a pretentious or prestigious department, and indeed when he was at a posh university in the Russell Group, Warwick University, he resigned after 6 years. He couldn't stomach it more than 6 years, and he resigned because of the commercialisation of higher education. And of course, the great scholar that he was, he combined that resignation with a full pamphlet about how angry he was and why. And this, of course, became some of his finest writing. He spent most of his teaching career in adult education courses, and it was the posh university that created his disgust. Thompson was a great scholar, and this scholarship was always driven by politics. Richard Taylor's fine analysis, great book this, on English radicalism in the 20th century, showed the value of what he described as, quote, critical political analysis in an historical frame, end of quote. EPT is part of this tradition, this ambivalent, radical, disturbing tradition of, say, a Bertrand Russell, of a George Orwell, of a Sylvia Pankhurst. This is not easy thinking. This is not paint by numbers knowledge. It agitates. It provokes. It's disturbing. As Emma Griffin has confirmed, he was certainly original and he was incredibly courageous, but later on in his life, he was highly isolated as well. He argued throughout his life for the importance of agency, working class agency. But of course, he did this during the period where structuralist theories were critiquing agency, and there was a lot of structural analysis on the configuration of discourse and the frame. He was an outsider, he was a dissident. But for those of us who remain horrified and really disgusted at the nature of our university sector, we have to remember that he wrote incredible books while in this marginalised teaching role. He was doing a huge teaching load, and that's where he produced these books. His wonderful wife, Dorothy, stated after his death that, quote, writing was always second to teaching, end of quote. Think about all those professors on those research-only contracts with their posh titles and the posh grants. They will never produce anything that is 1% as significant as EPT. He was difficult. He attacked French theory and French theorists. He attacked Stuart Hall. He attacked Richard Johnson at the Birmingham Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies. And he was so angry that he presented these critiques in monographs, in entire books. He had passion, he had intellect, and yes, he was wrong a lot. The legendary historian and former comrade of EPT, the wonderful Eric Hobsbawm, offered two great critiques of his friend. He stated that EPT, quote, fitted the romantic image of a genius in looks, life, and work, end of quote. Fantastic. But then he also stated, quote, and this is brilliant, quote, nature had omitted to provide him with a built-in sub-editor and an inbuilt compass. End of quote. Brilliant analysis from Hobsbawm and accurate. An impressive, charismatic public figure. EPT, he wrote long, he needed to edit more, he wrote long, and he held grudges for a lifetime. But he wrote sentences that changed the world. I dedicated this Outrider to Piper and to Aidan. And in many ways, the only gift I can give them is one sentence from EPT in the preface of The Making of the English Working Class. He stated, quote, the working class did not arise like the sun at an appointed time. It was present at its own making. End of quote. This is the greatest statement about consciousness that has ever been made. It is the deepest critique of identity politics that has ever been offered. We are present in our own making, and the labels and the agenda and the stuff comes later. We are present at our own making. E.P. Thompson would have been 100 years of age in 2024, and like so many of the great scholars that changed the world, he died in his 60s. But wow, what a legacy. He had profound weaknesses in the poverty of theory. He stated, quote, I don't apologise too much, end of quote. And he didn't. But of course, we live in times of apologies, where most of us who even breathe, most of us who even attempt to occupy a little bit of space, have to apologise for that. We have to apologise for being ourselves. E.P. Thompson was disenchanted most of the time, but he was confident, often outrageously so. And when reading E.P. Thompson now, as I've done to prepare this Outrider, read it again, as I did when I was a very young woman, we realise how much we've lost from our universities, how much we've lost from intellectual life. We are small. We cannot speak. We cannot challenge. We sit. We are marginalised. We are ignored. We are humiliated. But I summon a quote from E.P. Thompson in Writing by Candlelight. Quote, "It's never safe to assume that our history is altogether dead. It is more often lying there as a form of stored cultural energy." End of quote. We are not dead. Our ideas are not dead. They are stored cultural energy. We need to remember that E.P. Thompson left our university sector in disgust in 1970 and just lived a beautiful rural life as a free scholar, independent, so he could be a public intellectual. He could be an organic intellectual. But he was able to do that because his wife, Dorothy Thompson, stayed in the university sector in an academic career. She was literally working for the man. So EPT could be the founder of END, the European Nuclear Disarmament Movement, because Dorothy Thompson paid the bills. Significantly, the US equivalent of EPT is the legendary Howard Zinn, remarkable man, history from below, yeah? And while he certainly was removed from Spelman College, significantly Zinn, although it was a complicated relationship with Boston University, he was able to stay and work at Boston University until he decided to finish. So the US system could hold a radical scholar. The British university system couldn't hold an E.P. Thompson. E.P. Thompson, therefore, for us today, remains an outrider for our journey. Difficult, angry, charismatic, defiant. Our current university system could not create an E.P. Thompson today. And that is to our shame. We discredit books and we demean the people who write them. We also shame those with political views, describing them as, what do the young people say? Woke? E.P. Thompson is lost to us, but his books remain. And the lesson there is the books are our legacy. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.